Great. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukie Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the city website at www.milwaukieoregon.gov. You can locate them by navigating to the community calendar where tonight's meeting page is posted. If you have not reviewed the agenda, please do so now. It contains important information about the process. The City of Milwaukie respectfully acknowledges that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Clackamas people. In 1855, the surviving members of the Clackamas signed the Willamette Valley Treaty, also known as the Kalapuya Treaty, with the federal government in good faith. We offer our respect and our gratitude to the indigenous people of this land. Our first order of business is our meeting minutes. We don't have any minutes to consider, so we'll move on to informational items. Are there any informational items from staff?
The only thing that I wanted to mention is we've got this great open house on Thursday night for the Washington Monroe Street Greenway project. So that's going to be at the Wichita Park from 5 to 7. So I just want everybody to know that that's happening if you want to join and give some thoughts on the design.
Great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And NDA meetings with Planning Commission, have we set that yet, Laura? I know we were talking about it.
We keep moving it around and moving it around, trying to find the right time.
Sure.
Right now is we've moved it again, tentatively scheduled for October 22nd.
Okay.
And try to stick with that date.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what it is at the moment.
Okay. And then our kind of annual Planning Commission City Council.
Yes, I did get some information about that today. I had originally put that on the agenda for November, but they're hoping to move it to the first meeting in December, so it'd be December 17th.
Okay. First meeting in December.
September, the 2nd. Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's the 2nd, yes.
Okay.
So it's the 17th, yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
We can move on to audience participation. This is an opportunity to comment on items not on tonight's agenda. Does any audience member wish to comment on an item not on the agenda? If anyone's participating virtually, please use the raise your hand feature on Zoom or dial *9 to indicate you wish to make a comment. Do we have anyone online?
We do have someone online in the attendees section of the Zoom, but they have not indicated that they wish to speak.
Give them a moment. I think everyone else here is for the application. All right, we can move on. At this point in the agenda, the Planning Commission will act as the Community Involvement Advisory Committee, although we want to hold off on any updates until the work session where the Planning Commission and staff discuss the overview of the CIAC. Does anyone on the audience wish to speak to the Planning Commission in our role as the CIAC? Again, please use your raise your hand feature in Zoom or *9 if you're dialing in. Are there any other CIAC related updates, either from staff or for the Planning Commission?
I don't have any updates.
All right, hearing none. We can move on to our hearing item of the evening. The next agenda item is a Type 3 application for downtown design review and a variance. This is file numbers DR-2024-001 and VR-2024-002. The Type 3 application for downtown design review and variance for the proposed 1847 food park at 1915 through 1925 Southeast Scott Street is called to order. As a reminder, on the August 13th, the Planning Commission reopened the public record at the request of the applicant and continued the hearing until tonight. The applicant has the burden of proving that application is consistent with the city's zoning and subdivision ordinance, the comprehensive plan, any applicable municipal code provision, and that the proposal conforms with the city's applicable criteria. I'd like to ask staff to cite the zoning ordinance section or sections where the criteria could be found.
Milwaukee Municipal Code Title 12, Streets, Sidewalks, and Public Places. Municipal Code Section 19.304, Downtown Mixed Use Zone. Section 19.508, Downtown Site and Building Design Standards and Guidelines. Chapter 19.600, off-street parking and loading. Chapter 19.700, public improvements. Section 19.907, downtown design review. Section 19.911, variances. And section 19.1006, type 3 review.
Great. All testimony and evidence must be directed towards the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address a criterion or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each item precludes appeal to the City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow a response also precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party with standing may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons with standing are those who submit comments or testify. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the Planning Commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuance or extension shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule unless the continuation or extension is requested or agreed to by the applicant. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain from this hearing?
No.
No. We don't have the planning commissioners who were absent before here tonight. They're absent again. So let me ask, does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or a potential conflict of interest? No?
No.
Seeing none from our planning commissioners online. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to report on any ex parte contacts? No?
No.
Seeing none online and hearing no's in the room, will any planning commissioner who's visited the site prior to the hearing please raise their hand? Great. Does any planning commissioners who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or note anything different from what was indicated in the staff report for the application? No. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the Planning Commission? None in the room and none online. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? Hearing none, seeing none. Great. Then, Vera, could we get the staff report?
Okay. Good evening, Commissioners. Vera Collier, Senior Planner, here to present the staff report for this continued public hearing for the 1847 Food Park. At the Planning Commission meeting on June 11th, which was the first hearing for this development for the project, planning staff recommended approval of the application. The recommendation was based on meeting the intent of the downtown design guidelines, that the development enlivens the public realm and streetscape with active ground floor uses. The Planning Commission did not concur with staff's recommendation. The key issue appeared to be the lack of prominent buildings proposed for the project, and that the building that was proposed, which is the tap room, was not located at the street to provide the type of massing to engage with the street and the pedestrian realm that is described in the code. As a result, staff has prepared a staff report and findings to deny the applications. And those detailed findings of denial were included in the staff report as attachment 1. Staff notes that we continue to recommend approval of the application for the record. As the chair noted, after that initial evidentiary hearing, the applicant requested that the commission reopen the hearing to present additional verbal and written testimony. The commission did so, and we are here at this continued hearing tonight. Additional written testimony from the applicant team was included as an attachment to the staff report, and then additional comments have been submitted over the last couple of weeks that we've sent on to the applicant and to the commission and made that part of the record. And we can talk about that at that appropriate time for the hearing. Okay. Brief recap of where we are. So the site is directly next door to City Hall. It's here outlined in orange. It's the site located at 1915 and 1925 Southeast Scott Street. It is zoned downtown mixed use, and it is the former site of the Peak Funeral Chapel and parking lot. The site is currently vacant and has frontages on McLaughlin Boulevard, Scott Street, and Main Street. This is the site plan for the proposed food park. I know that the applicant team will go through this, so I won't belabor the site plan. We've all seen it. But again, the applicant is seeking land use approval to develop the site as a food park. So there would be a tap room building, more or less directly adjacent to the City Hall building. There is a canopy, permanent canopy that would be built above a sunken seating area. The existing parking lot is going to be retained. It will be improved, and there will be bike parking, and planting will be included in there. And then the food carts themselves would be arranged on the other portion of the property that's at the corner of Scott Street and Main Street. Here's a couple of illustrative perspective drawings that were included in the application materials to get a sense of where we are. So this is looking sort of up from on Main Street, basically if you kind of lived in one of the North Main units, I think. And then kind of from the interior, so that's the wall of City Hall that you see there, but you can see the tap room and then the sunken seating area that is covered with that permanent timber structure. So from a review process standpoint, this project does trigger downtown design review, as well as the associated downtown design standards in 19.508. There are two tracks for review in the downtown, either compliance with the clear and objective standards or to meet the design guidelines. And that's a discretionary review, and that is a type 3 review, which is why we are here. The applicant had elected to go through that discretionary review process and to meet the design guidelines. Given the development itself. All right, so we have a downtown design review application for type 3 because the application and the proposed project does not meet all of the design standards themselves. The proposal is not typical of recent downtown development. It does not include a large building occupying most of the site. The food park would include two permanent structures, which is that open timber canopy over the sunken seating area, and then that permanent tap room, seating area, restroom building that we showed on one of those drawings earlier. Much of the site will be taken up with seating and then spaces for those food carts or food trucks. So it is far below the minimum FAR on the site. In this zone, it is the minimum FAR is 1 to 1. So the FAR on this site, as a result, is a 0.2. Because of the lack of permanent buildings on the property. The only real permanent building that would contribute to the FAR is that taproom building. It is a little over 4,000 square feet. So a type 3 variance is required because it doesn't meet that minimum FAR in the zone itself. And again, because of in general, the downtown design standards seem to be targeted towards construction of building on the site, and those are the standards themselves. Because of the nature of the proposal and the additional design flexibility necessary for the development of a food park rather than a more traditional multi-story building, consistency with those downtown design guidelines is what we're looking at in reviewing this application. So the key question that we've asked within this application and reviewing it is the proposal consistent with the purpose and intent of the downtown design guidelines? And those go through all the different elements within the 19.508. The downtown mixed use zone allows a wide range of uses like retail, office, commercial, and residential, and restaurants, of course, that will bring visitors to the downtown. Folks live here, shop here, dine here, et cetera. And as stated in the downtown zone itself, the desired character for the zone is pedestrian friendly, a vibrant urban center, prominent Main Street, connections to the riverfront, and it does include language that says, and which includes buildings that are built to the right of way and are oriented toward the pedestrian, with primary entries located along streets rather than parking lots. So that's the general character that's being expressed within 19.304, which is the downtown mixed use zone itself. Based on the discussion at the last hearing, the staff has prepared findings for denial of the application that were included with the staff report. The direction from the commission was that the variance to the minimum floor area ratio was not approvable at 0.2. The discussion during the hearing related to the expressed intent and purpose of the development in the downtown. that the desired character is pedestrian-friendly, prominent buildings, or buildings that are built to the right-of-way and oriented toward the pedestrian. The key issue appeared to be that lack of prominent buildings being proposed on the site, and that the building that was proposed was not located at the street to provide that kind of massing, engage with the street and the pedestrian realm. These are the various design elements that are included in 19.508, which are the design standards. And they each have standards, sort of the math of what you need to meet the standards. They also have guidelines that are associated with them that would be responded to in a type 3 review process like we are here tonight. Although the commission did not discuss each design element in detail during that first public hearing, in preparing new findings for each design element, we went through each element and guideline with an eye towards its relationship to FAR. FAR is linked to these design standards. It's talking about the intensity of development on a site, and is generally measured as amount of building that's on a site. As directed by the Planning Commission, we prepared findings for denial for the guidelines that clearly expressed a relationship between a building and the street, that buildings should be located close to street. And we've got some examples for discussion tonight, but all of the detailed findings were included in the packet. I think the findings are 46 pages, so I think we covered them all. But we can talk about those later. But some of the examples of some of the design elements that we talk about included first, site frontage, for example, to encourage building design and site placement that enlivens the public realm and streetscape through significant building presence along site frontages and active ground floor uses. So that's the guideline for the site frontage design element. So although the proposed food park does include an open air canopy near the corner of Scott and Main Streets, it does not have walls. So it's not considered to have floor area. So it's not part of the calculation for the FAR. And its purpose is to provide weather protection for a seating area. It's not a significant building presence at the street, without those walls. The taproom building is proposed to be located more than 70 feet away from Main Street. So it's sort of in the kind of back portion of the food park itself. So it likewise does not contribute to a continuous site wall that might integrate storefront opportunities and architectural interest along the street. So that's an example of how we talk about it within the findings to respond to that design element. We talk about building entrances, and again, the open air canopy and the existing monument sign will establish a corner at Scott and Main Street and the site entrance, but they don't create a prominent building entrance. So that's, again, another example of how we've discussed that at your direction. We did talk about the design element of plazas and usable open space, and that idea that plazas and open space are designed for usability, variety of activities at all hours, et cetera. But we do note, though, and I know that this came up during the last hearing, that element relates directly to plazas that are created as part of the setback of a building. It's not intended that every development in downtown have a plaza or an open space. And I know we talked about this, as I said, at the last hearing. So this proposal is not for a building with a plaza in front like Historic City Hall. So this element really doesn't apply to the development. So I just wanted to clarify that because we did talk about that a bit at the last hearing. So I wanted to clarify that specific design element as a point for the proposal. So again, as part of sort of our overall analysis, as far as the recommendation for denial, it's not a typical development in the downtown as a food park. But its overall design does not meet the intent and purpose of development in the downtown. It doesn't provide a significant or prominent building presence to the site. It does include 2 permanent structures, but again, they don't contribute significantly to FAR as kind of directed by the code and sort of establishing that pedestrian environment at the street. Much of the site will be taken up with seating and the food carts and the food trucks themselves, as well as the parking lot on that portion that's closest to McLaughlin. So it's far below the FAR 1-to-1 on the site. So the proposal has been found as part of this analysis to be inconsistent with the design standards and guidelines, and that the variance is not reasonable and appropriate for development in the downtown, being so far below the minimum of 1-to-1. So while the proposal does not emphasize large buildings, it is proposed with permanent structures and key locations that anchor the site. It's open and visible to pedestrians and does create an obvious connection to the street, but for some of these key pieces within that 19.508, and of course the minimum FAR, you have findings in your packet to support the direction of denial for the project. We received a lot of comments this round for the hearing. I've just sort of summarized who sent in comments in support of the project, and then the folks that submitted comments in opposition to the project. There are also a couple of folks that I didn't categorize either way. Janice Harlow talked about, she had questions generally about parking in the downtown, so she didn't really speak to the project itself, but just more the overall parking. I did respond and let them know that a parking lot was part of the development. They didn't get back to me, but I just wanted to just let you know that I did point them to the application materials. And then Rory, the mayor of West Lynn, shared some comments about a positive experience that they have had in West Lynn with a similar food park or food cart pod in their downtown as well. And it sounded like from his comments that their code did not have food carts as sort of an expressly permitted development. So it seemed, I think, to him similar in our situation. So shared their experience with this as well. So you have some decision-making options. You can deny the application subject to the findings of denial that were included in the staff report. You could deny the application with modified findings of denial. We would just need to read those into the record. You could approve the application subject to the previous findings and conditions of approval that were submitted as part of the June 11th hearing, or you could continue the hearing. The applicant did provide an extension to the 120-day clock to October 2nd of 2024. So that's where we are right now. I'm happy to answer any questions or any comments.
Great, thanks so much, Vera. Any clarifying questions for staff? Vice Chair Freeman and Commissioner Fuenmayor, we can't see you at the moment. So if you have anything, feel free to just jump in.
No questions, Chair. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, great. We can see you now. Okay, no questions. Any questions in the room? No questions. I had a question, Vera, about the downtown design standards and guidelines 19508. When I was kind of prepping for this over the weekend, I ended up on our code online and was just noticing there was a number of diagrams and figures that I think were somewhat illustrative of the code. I was wondering if you might be able to pull that up just so we could look at some of those images.
Sorry, this is the code section for 19.508 downtown design. And I sort of scroll down to the downtown design elements. I assume that's kind of where you wanted to talk about. So the applicability, sorry, let me go. So frontage occupancy requirements. So this identifies sort of where buildings ought to be as part of the standards and their relationship to the sidewalk and the street. So you can see kind of how the code measures site frontage and how much building is occupying that frontage of a lot. Stop me whenever you're ready to have me stop. There's a first floor build to line. Again, that's more of a setback, basically, wanting that first floor to be essentially adjacent to the sidewalk to establish that building line. We do have maximum setbacks in the code as well, again, trying to establish that relationship between the building and the street. Ground floor, active ground floor space, so wanting that first floor ceiling height to be a little bit higher, so it accommodates more uses and how deep those first floor spaces ought to be. And then we get into some building design articulation standards as well. And horizontal articulation, windows and columns of windows and the orientation of windows, that sort of thing, wall planes. Talk about building materials for buildings. Minimum glazing standards as well. This section talks about primary entrances, so either at corners to really establish the corner for those lots or where they are in a lot if it's not on a corner. But building entrances ought to be prominent. Let's see, lots of words. Facade variation, recesses, balconies. Again, trying to break up wall planes for larger buildings. Sorry. Transitions, that doesn't apply here, of course. We don't have a residential zone adjacent to the site. Weather protection elements, again, all geared towards buildings. Rooftop equipment, making sure the sight lines are protected. And I think
that
that's
might be
the
it as
last of
well.
the drawings.
And then I guess just maybe a question, especially maybe for some newer commissioners, I think it was last year where the city, we retired our design and landmarks committee. A proposal like this would have, in the past, originally gone to the DLC for review and discussion before.
And recommendation.
And recommendation to the planning committee. And this is the first time, that we've now had something where that committee of architects and other folks doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And we're fully responsible for kind of stewarding the downtown design standards and guidelines.
That is correct.
Okay. Yeah. I don't have any other questions for staff. Anyone else? Great. Have we received any other correspondence on the matter other than those that you kind of referenced in the meeting packet or in the slides there?
No, the last, there was a comment that was sent late this afternoon from Tim Gerald, sorry. But I did send that out and their comment has been included in the record and is noted in the presentation, but yeah, that's it.
Would the applicant or their representative like to comment? If you could state your name and city of residence for the record. Don't need your address. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Garrett Stevenson. I'm a land use attorney representing the applicant and our offices in Portland, Oregon. I'm here tonight with our project architects, Carl Raffi and Terry Amundsen, as well as Eric Saunders, who is going to testify on behalf of the applicant itself as one of the gentlemen involved with RMCC development. But before I turn it over to Carl and Terry, I want to set the stage a little bit about why we came back to this Planning Commission and what we have to talk about. I was engaged after the last meeting, which I believe was on June 11th, and I watched the hearing. And our concern was, and this is just a feature of every planning commission in every city, but basically what happens is we try to make the best case we can without necessarily knowing what the planning commission's concerns might be. And then it's turned over to the planning commission and the real discussion happens from then without our ability to necessarily be able to answer questions that come up during that time. And I think to a certain extent, that's what happened on June 11th. My client, as well as the architects, were concerned that the points that they were trying to make weren't landing the way they necessarily wanted to, but more broadly, that we wanted to address the concerns that the Planning Commission raised during deliberation, because procedurally we can't do that. And so what I would encourage the Planning Commission to do, since this is a fairly empty room tonight, and there's two fewer of you than we thought there would be, but if you have points that you'd like to discuss or concerns, please, I'd encourage you to bring those up now, ask us questions so that we have the ability to respond. And that's not something that you were obligated to do, certainly when the record was closed and you were in deliberation. But since we're back now, please feel free to do that, and I'd encourage you to do so. So that's really why we're here. We want to respond to some of those concerns. And I just want to say, I really appreciate the Planning Commission giving us the opportunity to do so. I know your time is valuable and we don't want to waste it. To just give you a little précis of what I'm going to talk about after we get through some of the discussion about the design itself is one of the themes that I heard during the Planning Commission meeting is the concern that this is a square peg in a round hole. And first of all, I could understand how that is kind of the first analogy that comes to mind, although I don't agree that that's what this is. What I'm going to talk about a little bit later is what the whole purpose for a design district, a downtown design district is. And in our view, and certainly we consulted with the planning staff on this as well, is that the whole goal of these design guidelines are not simply to construct buildings that look a certain way. The whole goal is one of several implementing items that the city uses to attract business, commerce, and human beings to its downtown and make them feel comfortable. And we believe that the food park does that as good or better than any building can. And I can talk a little bit more about that later, but that's really the theme of our discussion tonight. So with that, I'll turn it over to Carl here. And he's gonna, we originally planned a little bit longer of a presentation for the two planning commissioners that didn't show tonight, but since you've all seen it before, Carl, go ahead and take them through it, but we probably don't need to spend too much time, but please do ask questions.
Yeah, and we have time as well, so
Yeah.
feel free to take your time too.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Vera, would you like to cue up my slideshow? Yes, my role was going to be to introduce the project to any new faces here, but so far everyone is familiar, so I can be a little bit expedient. But I can still do a bit of a recap and sort of refresh everyone's memory.
We can hold for a second while Adobe tries to convince Farah to upgrade and sign in. There we go, great.
Okay, we've all seen this cover splash, so I think we can go to the next slide. Once everything is loaded. The immediate context of the site here is varied, of varying scales and materials and forms. The building we're in being a 3-story brick structure, public structure, civic structure. To the west, we have this variety of mixed-use housing with its more varied roof forms and its various materials and its commercial presence. And directly to the south, we have this single-story commercial building. So we've got a number of different forms and materials at which we are the crux of. Next slide, please. The demolition of the Peak Funeral Home was an inspiration, actually, for us. We saw opportunity in the ruins, in the topography that was created, the various spaces that were created, the levels of seating areas that might be created. In the top right, that image, there was a small apartment unit building. The removal of the chapel revealed a sunken basement, which created an interesting place to arrive at, stepping down from the sidewalk. The existing monument sign at the corner was preserved, and with the thought that we could repurpose it in the new design. So there were a number of these pieces of the story of the site and the history of the site that we thought we could fold in to our project. This top left photo, you see the sidewalk bleeds onto the site at the same level before it steps down into the basement of the formal chapel. So we want to start connecting some of these elements and giving them new life in our design. Next slide. So the site plan that we arrived at places the tap room at the heart of the site, at the location of those former apartments. It is our tallest structure, which is appropriate for placing next to the tall blank wall of City Hall. The open air canopy at the southeast corner engages the sidewalk at sidewalk level, creates an entrance, and then bridges down into that sunken dining area of the chapel basement. The existing asphalt parking in the northeast corner of the site, we will excavate and connect into that basement area so that those spaces can flow together and create a variety of scales of dining opportunity. We are afforded the luxury of an existing parking lot on the west side, which a lot of facilities like this would not have, and we're going to preserve that while updating it with additional bike parking. We have the opportunity to tuck trash and recycling far from the street view at the northernmost end of that. Next slide. This image starts to show the way this project works at various levels. The tap room will have an open air sheltered rooftop deck offering views in every direction. The second level will have large roll-up doors that provide sort of an indoor-outdoor experience and views across the site and beyond. Next slide. The tap room building is an anchor for the site. It has permanent restrooms and engages directly outdoor spaces with roll-up doors at ground level opening to fire table areas and offers easy access to trash and recycling. Next. This shows the height of the building, the way the roll-up doors are a prominent feature of the facade, expresses the structural rhythm of the open-air trusses are set up a rhythm for the building, and they echo the truss design of our open-air canopy, which is the other, obviously, important element of the project on the site. Next slide. I think you pretty well understand. This will be incorporating accessibility, of course, with new code-compliant ramps down to all levels of dining in this project. This basement will be about 2/3 sheltered so that it is usable in any weather condition, but while affording still some open daylight area. Next slide, please. So we did want to bring in some new imagery to this to help convey the vitality and the sense of community that comes along with these sorts of projects. And for the most part, these are all in the very near region. We have in the top left corner Hawthorne Asylum in Portland, which has been very popular for years. A newer one in the bottom left is Cartside in North Portland on Williams, and that roof deck experience is very similar to what we will have in our project, 1847. The top right image is actually from Vancouver, BC, but I appreciated the way they reinvigorated this sunken plaza area that was below the sidewalk level and gave it new life. Bottom right, we have Hillsborough Downtown Station, a little more close to home. Next slide, please. And just a few more. Somebody already mentioned the Willamette Garage in West Lynn. You can see the way in between the top left photo and the bottom right photo, it's active day and night. Right near my house here in the top right is the food cart's over by Prost on Mississippi in North Portland. And bottom left is Oregon City. So you can see that these projects are successful and vital all around us. Garrett, that's about all I had to say.
Thanks, Carl.
I'd be happy to kick it back.
Do you
to
have any design questions? Because you've got the right folks up here right now prepared to answer any design questions you might have.
Yeah, sure. I'll open it up and see if there's any questions. I'll also look to our attorney, who sometimes encourages us not to get into design charrettes with applicants, but also hearing you're inviting some questions at the same time. Justin, I don't know if you have any guidance, I guess.
I don't necessarily have any guidance. I think questions are fine.
Sure, great.
I don't think the planning commission should be in the job of trying to ask for different amenities than the design presents. But you're certainly welcome to have to answer or to ask any questions to the applicant about their project.
Great, thanks. Yeah, any questions then for the applicant on their designs?
Yeah, I have maybe a quick one. So I think it seems like maybe to meet some of the downtown design guidelines, another option could have been more of sort of like an indoor food hall, I suppose, just trying to think of the realm of possibility. And I'm guessing, well, I guess I won't guess. Was something like that considered in light of that? And if so, could you talk through the decision to ultimately not go in that direction? Was it driven by the existing site and the structure of it?
Yeah, we did have discussions about all of those various options. And I think to just expand on what Carl conveyed, it was really at the point of the demolition when we were all walking the site together as a group and we saw this terraced site that was sort of existing there. And the idea of the architecture taking advantage of, the poor or previously developed portions of the site was what weighed in on that decision making. There's where the chapel used to be, there's where the apartments used to be, and then there's the open areas. And we literally just started working within those parameters. And the goal was always from the discussions to have a pretty significant variety of indoor and outdoor spaces to take advantage of the views, of course, to the west especially. I think you said west for the apartments, but I think west is the river. But and then and then to have the interaction, the interaction from the sidewalk where people can walk down the sidewalk and see that lower area that's only about 3 to 5 feet, varies as it goes down below grade. So there's a good visual interaction. And then the interaction like Carl described between the second floor and the third floor, opening up to all those areas. So we really wanted that diversity. And I think that's valuable for connecting people.
We also looked at a couple that were kind of a warehouse style almost type of things. Like there's a few around, and we really just didn't like that kind of big warehouse style food cart thing with all the variety of the summer, the river. And those don't really tie to the community as much because they just become an indoor food thing. So something we definitely talked about and we looked at.
Great, thanks for that context.
Perhaps along those similar lines, had you looked at other layouts for the building location? Or maybe you can walk us through kind of how you landed in that location instead of kind of frontage?
Yeah, we did. We looked at multiple layouts, and I really think the sort of ruins of the site kind of drove the direction for where we placed the primary structures. But the main reasoning for the it's a pretty large scale canopy, the covered open canopy. We specifically put that towards the intersection to create, an aspect of a facade and a colonnade along the two street frontages at that primary corner. Of course, it's open, so it doesn't meet the FAR. And again, like Garrett was stating, that's sort of why we're here. So we did, try to make sure that we had the corner really locked in with that open canopy structure. And we kept that as low as we could because the lower area protects the lower area better, but it also just creates more of a eave line and more of a facade or a frontage line, even if it's just columns and openness to the activity.
Is there any discussion, maybe building on Commissioner Carpenter's question about, roll-up doors along the side of it, right? To maybe make it go from open air structure to kind of quasi-building?
I don't think anybody is really opposed to that idea. It was just the point that, we had the discussions about, we have the building that we can fully enclose that's weather protected in the wintertime. And then we have the structure that's a large scale. So if you're away from the edges, you're protected, that it will have heaters suspended from above. So again, it's creating that diversity of space types for people to choose from. But I'm speaking for other people, but I don't think anybody had anything against the idea of something that could enclose that under certain conditions.
Commissioner Fuenmayor or Vice Chair Freeman, any questions from you?
No additional questions, Chair. Thanks.
I guess I'm going to expand on that. Sorry, I'm going to expand on my answer just slightly. And we are not against conditions of approval that have clarity and logic to them, that might go in directions like you're talking about.
Ernestine, I see you thinking.
Yes. Well, I had the same questions that the other commissions had, mostly about during the design process. One of the things to meet the guidelines, and with the canopy on the corner, and that you understand there is the entrance and the indication, but it's still the frontage and the setbacks that of the main building that I understand is driven by the foundations and the different levels. But it's still, the setback is way far. It's like 70 feet from the edge, so from the street, as is indicated in the report multiple times. My question goes in like, is it open to move closer to a building? Is it an option to have a frontage? Is the design team really open to increase the FAR or like into that building, the profile into the downtown that we are looking for into the projects that are coming in?
Maybe just.
I don't know if that makes any sense, my question, but.
No, I understand where you're getting at, and I can try to respond to that. There's a lot of subjectivity in design that plays into your question, of course. Part of the conversation as well was, again, that connectivity between the site and the street frontages, and to be able to look through the canopy and see the activity at the lower level and then the upper level beyond it, and then into the open tap room beyond, was all part of what our discussion, how we arrived at where we came to. And it was about connectivity and activity and things that, we have always understood as being very important for the street frontages and even some of the diagrams in the language of the code that Vera shared allude to, a certain depth of the site needs to be activated, even if it's a solid building frontage with windows. And so that's why we're here. We believe we meet the intent of that by what we proposed.
And it might be good for me to just jump back in here a little bit to talk about how this design works in terms of the guidelines. And one of the things that Vera and Laura and I talked about along with my client is what are we trying to achieve with design guidelines? Because having worked in downtown, and I never left my office during the recession, we had a number of beautiful buildings in downtown that would meet and exceed this city's guidelines, and there wasn't a single person doing anything inside of them. And what we were talking about in terms of this discussion was, what is the right thing to make this use succeed? Because the goal of a food cart or pod or a food park is to get people to attend it. And it is understandable that when you're used to seeing buildings come up on every single block, you need to have design guidelines that talk about how we make those buildings acknowledge the human beings that are walking in front of them and are interacting in the downtown. I looked at just about every single design standard that this city has for its downtown, and every one of them, to me, didn't relate to the abstract idea of having an building. It related to how does that building relate to a human being? And so, Chair Sherman, when you were asking to look at all those pictures in the code about design standards, all of those, and I would invite Vera to comment on this if she disagrees or agrees, but all of those ultimately are intended to make the streetscape pleasant for the human beings on that streetscape. They are not there as monoliths. We are not doing, kind of this modernist Art Deco thing where the whole idea is to build great buildings and the humans come second. Design standards, particularly those that have come down in the last 30 years, are specifically intended not just to foster a building, but to connect the uses that are within those buildings to the human beings on the street. And before I was a lawyer, I trained and practiced as a planner, and I've sat where Vera is now. And so I do have kind of a comparative idea of how a lot of different design standards work. And in this regard, the city's design standards and its guidelines are very similar to a lot of other design standards and guidelines. Now, as I understand it, when we are going through this Type 3 process, the goal is to allow the Planning Commission to use its discretion to interpret and apply the design guidelines, not the standards. No question this doesn't meet the standards. If it met the standards, we wouldn't be here. And you cannot have anything like what we're proposing that meets the standards, simply because we're principally proposing a use, a very, very active use. And the building issue is simply to accommodate that use. So the goal is a use, the goal is activating the street, the goal is essentially creating a nice living room for the city. The buildings are there simply to serve that use. And so then the question becomes, okay, if we're looking at the guidelines, how do we look at those in that context? Because as Mayor Bielostowski from West Lynn pointed out in his email, this is not the first city to wrestle with this problem, right? You guys are charged with reviewing design guidelines that were written without the thought that we may see something like cart pods and food courts and food parks be a huge driver of commerce and development in central cities. But I got to tell you, the folks in Portland, my guess is that there's quite a few buildings that would meet your design guidelines that they would trade in a second for a food park like this. So then the question becomes, what guidelines are at issue and how do we meet the intent of those? And when I reviewed the Planning Commission's discussion from the first hearing, the ones I focused on, and please correct me if I missed any or I got the wrong ones, but the ones I focused on, broadly speaking, are, this is all in MCC 19508 sub 4, subsections A3, which is site frontage, and B3, wall frontage. And in these instances, I went to see what are we trying to achieve with this guideline? Not what it looks like that meets the guideline, but what is the guideline trying to achieve? And this is all outlined in my letter of August 29th, but as to subsection A, the site frontage one, it says it talks about a continuous building frontage on the street to create compatibility and harmony between buildings to encourage pedestrian activities. These are not buildings for building's sake. We can have those. They can be entirely empty and still meet the guidelines. The goal is to have something there that encourages pedestrian activities. Second one is subsection B, is seeking to help enliven the street edge and pedestrian roam. And so when I look at that, if that's the purpose we're getting at, I'm not aware of very many other uses at all, if any, that serve to meet those guidelines as well as what you have in front of you now. We don't necessarily want roll-up doors that are going to shut this thing off along the street because we want people walking by to see people in there. The whole idea is to welcome the pedestrian into this area. And I got to tell you, when people who are walking on the street see other human beings out on the street having a good time, it is transformative to the area around that. And Vera, can we go back to those pictures of the other car pods that Carl had? Super. So, I mean, this is really what we're talking about. The whole purpose of, for example, an FAR minimum is to have a minimum amount of active space on the site. The idea is to not have a whole lot of things like parking lots and so forth. And I think that if I had a building that met a 1-to-1 FAR, and it was, say, just a typical commercial building, I cannot imagine having that many people night after night in that building using that space. So I would encourage a planning commission, yes, it's true, we don't meet the FAR because we're not proposing buildings. And we don't want to enclose them to make them buildings because that's counter to what we're trying to achieve with the use. But the FAR has a purpose, and that purpose is to foster active uses near the, a 1-to-1 FAR is to get as much activity on a given piece of property as is possible. And FAR minimums came about primarily starting in the 1970s, some earlier, and the whole purpose of those was because people were putting tiny little buildings and had acres and acres of parking. That's not what we see here. So if we want to measure things from the standpoint of what are we trying to achieve with these regulations, in our view, we achieve and exceed the objectives that these regulations are trying to meet. When I look at, for example, another section, wall structure and building facade detail, use design features and details to break down the scale and mass of a building to create comfortable, pedestrian-friendly environments and enclosure of public areas. I mean, to me, when I look at this knocks it out of the park with respect to that guideline. That's exactly what we're doing. And I'm going to quote from Vera's original staff report, and I'm just going to shamelessly plug again that staff still recommends approval. And so I think that they still believe that their initial proposed findings have validity, and we do too. And I thought I couldn't put it any better than Vera put it when she was talking about these particular issues, so street frontage and building facade. And she says as follows, although there is not a street-facing building facade, the open-air canopy is located very close to the corner of Scott Street and Main Street, establishing a key corner entrance that is transparent to the street, inviting patrons to the site. The proposed tap room building establishes a key corner to the back of the site. The design includes a partially covered roof deck, large glazed openings, and wood columns, as well as pre-finished metal panels. The upper floors of the tap room would have large operable windows which frame seating counters, providing another visual connection from the street to the activity on the site. No blank walls are proposed on the street. The entire site is open to pedestrians and activity that is highly visible, setting a clear physical and visual relationship between people on the site. Canopy, structure, and the tap room are scaled appropriately between the 3-story City Hall building and the north and 1-story multi-tenant development to the south. The nature of a food park allows design flexibility with food carts and movable furniture, providing a variety of configurations. The downtown mixed-use zone allows a wide range of uses, including retail, office, commercial, and residential, that will bring visitors to the downtown to live, work, shop, dine, and recreate. As stated in NMCC 19304, sub 1, sub A, the desired character for this zone is a pedestrian-friendly and vibrant urban center with a prominent main street and connections to the riverfront, which includes buildings that are built to the right-of-way and oriented towards the pedestrian, with primary entries located along streets rather than parking lots. I can't really put it in writing any better than Vera did in that finding, and it's entirely consistent with how I viewed this when I had to get up to speed on it. The other thing that I found interesting is I actually looked at the framework plan for for the downtown and riverfront, it's the Milwaukie Downtown and Riverfront Land Use Framework Plan in 2015. And one of the things that it calls for on Main Street is a retail spine. Reactivating Main Street is a major focus, reestablishing and strengthening a lively storefront retail character with a pedestrian emphasis and 24-hour use. So I am really struggling to think of another activity or use or design that would accomplish what this does in furtherance of those design objectives. Not the standards. The standards are merely tools for meeting the objectives, but the objectives, the reason why we have design guidelines and standards in the first place is to obtain a result. And that result is having people on the street, activating Main Street, and making everybody be able to see what's going on in every building on the main floor. One of the things that a lot of local governments do, and I believe Milwaukie does it too, is it has minimum ground floor active use area. The idea is you want to see human beings inside these buildings interacting. Well, what happens if you take the building away? You still have human beings interacting, which was the goal of the ground floor active use standard in the first place. So, I totally acknowledge it takes sort of a reframing of how we approach these guidelines to understand what we're trying to do. But I would encourage the Planning Commission to adopt a frame that considers not what the guidelines say, but what necessarily they're trying to achieve. And as I understand it, what this Planning Commission is empowered to do is to look at a design and see if it meets the intent of the guideline, not necessarily the requirements, the design requirements, because no use, no project is going to meet a design guideline the same way. But what is it doing in terms of the purpose of that guideline? So at the end of the day, where I think this story ends, at least for this Planning Commission, is the fact that you have a very, very good set of findings for approval that we tend to agree with. And from what I can gather, it's something that staff still agrees with. And you ask staff to propose findings for denial, and you have those as well. But ultimately, this is a use that you can approve. It is consistent with the purpose of each of the guidelines that we've talked about. We don't have time to talk about every one, but it is consistent with the purpose of those guidelines. But it is in your discretion, ultimately, whether you're willing to take on the framing that I'm suggesting. And you're not required to do so. I can't force you to do so. But I want to say, in talking with the mayor of West Lynn, his design commission went through the same process. And that resulted, ultimately they approved it, and he believes sensibly so. That resulted in the Willamette Garage. And the reason why I called him up is I was in a hearing there on a completely different issue, and somebody brought up how successful that was. And to me, that's the closest analogy to what we're doing here. Now, as for me, what I like about it is the fact that there isn't a building there. So if you're on the street, you can walk by and you can see all the way through the site, over the road, and potentially out to the river and the hills beyond. I mean, that is a great opportunity, and it's a great thing for the old city hall that's across the way there. So I think that there are advantages to not having a large, massive building there. Now, if we were coming to you with a different use, if we wanted to do a bank, if we wanted to do, a dry goods store of some kind, or, anything else, there would be a building. But you can't really, you can't necessarily adapt a food park, because the whole point is to get people active outside and to be interacting with each other and interacting with those on the street. You can't necessarily shoehorn that into something that is a large building. The attempts that I've seen at doing that, there's been a few in Portland, are far, to me, a little bit less successful. And the reason why they are is because they require a massive capital investment, and it is difficult to keep the same folks in these completely enclosed food parks or whatever. It's very, very difficult to keep one business in there. It's very expensive to move them in and out. Carts work far better for that. But I wouldn't want that here. I'd want to be able to see all the way around. I'd want to be able to see the people having a good time on the street. If I'm walking by and I've got a friend that lives close, I'd want to see that person wave me down, and then I could stop in for a pint of beer. That's the objective. Can you approve it? You absolutely can. Can you deny it? Of course you can. But for the reasons that we've illustrated, we really hope you'll use your discretion and apply the guidelines, with the understanding that this might not meet the letter of the standards, but it certainly meets the whole reason why those standards exist.
Great, thanks, Mr. Stevenson. I appreciate it. Appreciate some of the additional feedback from the larger team. Does any other planning commissioners have questions for the applicants? No? Great. Vera, do we have any people who would like to, so I guess we'll now move on to a person submitting public testimony on the application. If you're here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria, and to avoid repetition and information that is not relevant. As always, please state your name and city of residence for the record so they can be entered into the minutes. Vera, do we have anyone who wishes to speak in support of the application?
We do have someone named Andy online, but they have not indicated that they want to speak.
For anyone online, you can use the raise your hand feature on Zoom or *9 if you were calling in. Do we have anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to the application?
Andy has their hand raised.
Okay.
To speak.
If we could bring Andy in. I don't have our regular handy timer, but I'll just use the one on my phone here. Andy, we're gonna make it so you can speak in a minute. We'll limit public testimony to 3 minutes. And again, if you could please state your full name and city of residence for the record. Andy, are you there with us?
I am.
Great. All right. We welcome you to begin now.
Yeah, my name's Andy Fisher. I'm a resident in Milwaukie. My only question was just clarification on why the 1-to-1 FAR ratio isn't achievable within the food cart plan.
Great. Thanks for your comment. I think we will not necessarily ask the applicants to necessarily respond to that. We can then move on to any planning commissioners have questions for Andy. All right, hearing none. Do we have anyone who wishes to offer neutral testimony? All right. Are there any responses to any of the public testimony from staff?
Not regard, the question was pointedly to
Yeah, it was.
It seems so no.
And then does any member of the Planning Commission have questions regarding testimony we've received to this point? Great. Does the applicant have any rebuttal or any additional comments they would like to make in response to public testimony presented orally tonight or written, any of the written testimony we've also received?
Sure. So with regard to Andy's questions, I think Vera outlined it during her staff report. We don't meet the FAR requirement because this principally isn't a building, it's principally a use. But I wanted to at least give Eric the opportunity to to testify because, it's really his vision that's driven this. And if you have any questions about where he's coming from on this, we have him here tonight, which is a great opportunity. And I'm not putting you on the spot if you don't have anything to say, but I don't think he was here at the last meeting, so I wanted
I
to.
think he was,
Oh,
but
were you?
you didn't.
Oh, you were
you
saying,
didn't
okay.
testify, yeah. But now you know about that burritos are Mexican sandwiches, the horror movies, so.
I did learn all that.
Eric, we'd welcome you to please testify if you'd like.
No, I just wanted to talk real quick about what our vision was when we first bought this property. We looked at all kinds of different options, but we really wanted to tie what we were doing into Milwaukie, create Milwaukie a gathering place, a great place. It's a great little town. It's just kind of sleepy at the moment, needs something, So we looked at things, parking structure, all kinds of different options, storage units, but none of that helped Milwaukie and helped the other businesses. I've spent a lot of time at the beer store talking to the owner, not at the beer store. And they're fully supportive of that. The more people you can bring in, the better everybody does. We have all these closed, buildings up and down the street. And if we can kind of create something that brought in people, people from out of town, instead of driving all the way to Milwaukie or to wherever, come here, it's right here. All these different food options. We have 200 apartments that just went down the street that are not full yet, that are gonna be full. Another 200 that wanna go in when Pietro's moves. All those kind of things, and how do we build that? That was something that was super important to Steve and I, is how do we grow Milwaukie, be part of it, become part of the community? I mean, the reason we named it 1847 was, it's when Milwaukie started. We fully intend on putting little historical plaques about Milwaukie around there and just finding that place that brought Milwaukie, downtown Milwaukie together. That was all part of this conversation. To answer some of the questions, putting the bar or the tap room right in front, we built this wall and then we end up food carts behind it. No one even knows they're there. We wanted to bring those up front, make that important, make it visual so you can see right through it. So we could see the river, those kind of things were all kind of our original envision when we bought this. I mean, part of the reason we tore down the funeral home was to get rid of the stigma of the funeral home as soon as possible so we could build something of this nature. That's kind of my 2 cents and our actual basis of purpose of this. So
Thanks.
Any questions for me, please feel free to.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate you offering some testimony. It's helpful to hear some of your perspective and your vision. And I know you didn't testify previously, so appreciate you taking the time. Do any members of the Planning Commission have questions for Eric, the applicant?
I don't have a question. I just have a comment. I don't know if that's okay.
Maybe we'll refrain from comments, Commissioner Foyn-Mayor.
Well, okay, sure.
Great. We'll save comments for deliberation. I think that takes us to closing the public testimony portion of the hearing, unless there's anything else. Not seeing anything. Great. The public testimony portion of the hearing on the request of a downtown design review and variance at 1915 through 1925 Southeast Scott Street. This is file number DR 2024-001 and VR-2024-002 is now closed. Is the commission ready for discussion?
Yes.
Great. Vice Chair Freeman, I like our vice chair to often lead the discussion. I don't know if you'd like to share any thoughts based on the testimony that we received tonight.
Sure, I can start with just a couple comments as we start our discussion. It's helpful to hear the applicant's purpose and his intent. I think we've all reviewed the design several times. I think we've kind of all got stuck on some of the similar issues with meeting the FAR requirements. listening to the applicant says, essentially saying that it's up to us to make a decision of whether this is what we want for our community and for that area. There's a lot of talk about how the food carts could potentially bring in traffic or foot traffic, and they kind of cite, Oregon City and Portland and different areas. But listening to that, the first thing I thought was the food park, the existing food carts down the street. And I'm just thinking, is that happening down the street? And if so, is that something we can look forward to? And if it's not happening, is that something, we would expect from this new food cart lot? So, I think those are my initial thoughts.
Great. Any others want to kind of lead with any thoughts based on kind of updated testimony that we've received, written as well as tonight? Commissioner Carpenter?
I do have some ideas, but I just want to make sure other commissioners have
Great.
opportunity to weigh in.
I'm happy to jump in. I think I was sort of the only person last time that was sort of firmly in support, and I remain that way, I would say, and appreciate the clarifications that we got today and reopening the record. I think there's maybe two aspects of it for me, and I think the first is the design guidelines, and the applicant laid out their case well, and I rather strongly agreed with that previously, and I'm further compelled by what they said today, that this type of use, while not conforming to what's expected from a building, is very much the type of thing that I think would be beneficial to downtown. And so for those reasons, I think there's compelling evidence for the variance requests. The other piece that I think a lot of public comments around that we haven't really discussed, and I do think admittedly is a little bit outside the scope of the Planning Commission, is the kind of economic development question of what this means for other businesses in the area. And I think that was probably the number one thing in the opposition comments that came up, was folks are concerned that this would drive business away from existing businesses. And I'm certainly sympathetic to the challenges of running a small business and, the want to kind of protect like a customer base. But I think something like this, I still trying to think of the best way to word it, but downtown Milwaukee is not exactly at its like carrying capacity for customers, if that makes sense. And I think there's opportunity to where if there are more attractions and things that are going to bring people downtown, that's going to probably do more to widen the overall customer base than it is to create just competition among some finite amount of customers that are currently in the space. So that was the thing I think I was hung up on from reading public comment, and ultimately that's sort of where I landed, is I think just there is opportunity to bring more people into Milwaukee, and we see people doing that at the farmers market or at similar downtown events. And so while I'm definitely sensitive to those concerns of businesses and of folks that folks raised in comments, I don't see it as a zero-sum game where there's some finite amount of customers that are being competed for. I think generally development like this is probably largely beneficial to most businesses in the area. And so kind of for those two broad reasons, even though I started that second piece by saying it's probably outside the scope of the commission, I'm generally still strongly in support of approving the application with the findings of approval presented previously.
Great, thanks so much, Commissioner Mulhorn. I will agree with you. I think some of those economic development concerns are outside of the scope, but I also agree it might not be a zero-sum game. I will say that I myself appreciate the testimony tonight. Mr. Stevenson, I think some of the reframe that you presented, I think has been helpful for me in thinking about this. I am maybe moving from my kind of original positions. And, I think also hearing from the applicant team about working with, as I'll characterize it, some of the physical constraints of the site, driving some of the design decisions. I think that was something that, I think in our original hearing, we didn't hear maybe some of that testimony, or maybe I didn't hear it as clearly as have had more time to reflect on it myself. And I will say that I think clearly this being a type 3 review, and acknowledging, I think, the standards aren't met. And so we're thinking about this, relative to the guidelines and relative to the broader outcomes. And I think some of the argument that was made about, what is the outcome of a building or what is the outcome of a site? Certainly as maybe kind of clarified some of my own thinking on this. I wasn't sure if there was anything else that I wanted to say. I think that was kind of the main thing. There's probably some other things that will come up, but I know Commissioner Carpenter, you said earlier you had some thoughts that you wanted to share.
Yeah, again, happy to have further testimony. It clarifies the picture a lot more. I still have a lot of hangups and disagree where we talk about the purpose of the design guidelines. But I'm okay being maybe the only voice who stays in that position. I think if we had a more honest discussion that first meeting, it would have been, I'm not opposed to the use. I think the way that we got to the use could have engaged those design guidelines a lot better, and we could have reached a project that maybe, again, could have achieved the pedestrian orientation a lot better. I've done designs similar to this in terms of having renderings and making sure, or trying to portray and tell the story in just a few images, and that's really hard to do. And I maybe need to get over some of the images where I feel like, you know what, you've got fencing. I think fencing doesn't necessarily engage the pedestrian to want to go into a place you feel like there's a physical barrier that may be even more of a barrier than a wall of windows against a facade. That's my perspective. The different layers, I feel like the sunken part, you're below and you're not necessarily seeing all the people down below. I felt like that is maybe a missed pedestrian perspective. And so, again, it's not the use that I have a hang up with. It's the way that the use is being implemented or being applied to the design guidelines. If I had seen or felt, and I'm treading lightly, if that there was a bigger attempt to meeting even the design guidelines, I feel like I would have had an easier way to agree. So that's, again, where I stand. Also, and it was brought up that, yes, we have new apartments coming into town, bringing in lots of new people, which is great. We don't know necessarily what that will do to our downtown economy, what the needs are, what the uses are. And a site like this doesn't come around every day. To lock it in with what may seem like a temporary use feels like we're not taking into account what future development for the best and highest use could be for this site. Again, not saying the use is particularly at question. I just don't see that this space is being best served by, I guess maybe there's a little bit of use. If this had come as a temporary use permit saying, we're going to do this for 2 years and work on a development program to, see what the new market looks like and come back, or 5 years, something like that, again, I would see, and this gets into the economic development realm out of our jurisdiction, but I would be in more of support of more of a temporary use than going in this direction. So those are kind of my generalized thoughts, but yeah. But again, the testimony was very helpful. I agree with a lot of the points. I'm still wishing that we had gotten closer to some of the design guidelines. So thanks.
Great, yeah, and thanks for sharing some of, I guess, maybe some of those particular concerns about fencing or sight lines. I think it's helpful to hear some of that. Commissioner Fuenmayor, any thoughts?
Yeah. Honestly, first, my comment that I have was I'm a historic preservationist, and I am really sad to see a building torn down. Not only also for the body, energy embodying into a building that went into that building that existed in there, but all the things that happened in that place. That was part of the story of the city. So I'm just want to put that out there that I don't, for me, it's a loss when you see a building like that come down. Besides that comment, I want to say that Commissioner Carpenter, you pretty much said everything that I had been thinking throughout this past couple of weeks, throughout all the testimony and all that I've been reading and the file. One of the important things about the design guidelines, and I understand what the testimony today, which was very important to hear and very good to understand this. The point of view of the applicant is this sets a record, it will be a predecessor to what's coming in the future. So one of the things that the design line intend is not only a building, I understand, is to what do we want to see the city in the future, right? What we want to see and understand is about the people in the public realm. We want to see them walking through it. We want to interact with them, have them coming into any places that are there. The use is, as you said it very well, the use is fine. I think the meeting the needs of the design guidelines are important for the economic development in the future for the city. I just see it that way, even though it is not clear, and it's not in our review, I think, to fully respond to the economic developments of the city. We're just trying to review if it meets or not meets, and if we approve it or not. That's kind of where we at in this process. But anyway, in general, I feel still that it could have been more intention to meet that. It could have been, again, there's so many could, but what I can see now is hard for me to being okay in the future. As you said, one of the thoughts that I had when I was looking through it was when we did some of the survey for the hubs, and at least when I fill out the survey for the hubs, they was talking about this, what is the development for economic hubs, was one of the first steps is the food gardens. And I was thinking, is this the first step for the downtown Portland, downtown Milwaukie? Or should we be beyond the first step that then would develop into a more permanent structure in a few years? So as you said in there, if you're thinking that this would have been temporary, but it's not that in the planning on the thought, then it's kind of not really what I will prefer to see something next to City Hall, especially.
Thanks for sharing some of those thoughts. And I mean, I think the question of is this temporary? Is it not temporary? I mean, I don't. In some ways, I feel it's a little irrelevant. Developers are always thinking about maybe the future of their properties, and what you're doing, 6 months from now and 3 years from now or 10 years from now could definitely vary. I think we have a proposal in front of us, and we should really be focusing on that. recognize it doesn't necessarily meet with the guidelines kind of per se. And I think I certainly have struggled with this myself because they feel, as the question to Vera earlier of, we are in many ways now the stewards of the downtown design standards and guidelines in a way that this body hasn't been necessarily before. I think I myself have found a concern about deviating from them. Because, I just think in some ways there was, a thoughtful process that went into the creation of them. But I do think some of the broader intent of those standards and guidelines are towards kind of the overall purpose of this site. I had a few things pulled up earlier, and I'll hold off on it, but it's, I think some of this also falls in line with our broader comprehensive plan as a city. So, Vice Chair Freeman, I don't know, I know I kind of asked you to open the conversation. I don't know if you have, yeah.
We're having a bit of a technical difficulty. The computer has decided to restart itself
Oh,
Just in the middle of.
in the middle.
so did we just lose Josh and Ernestina?
I think we might want
The
to.
the Zoom stopped.
Oh,
I'm still here.
You just can't see them all on the screen, just
Oh.
so you're aware.
Okay.
There's only one screen at a time. I'm talking, so I'm on the screen. When they talk, they'll be on the screen.
oh, great. So do we want to take a?
I think it's okay. I think we're okay. Yeah.
We're okay. Yeah, we're all still present. Great. Yes,
Just
thanks.
if you see what's
Thanks just in
struggling over
terms. Yeah,
here,
I was like, why are they whispering to one another? So, Vice Chair Freeman, I know I asked you to kind of open with any thoughts. I don't know if based on the conversation so far, if you have any more to share in terms of where your thinking is on the proposal.
I don't have any more to share, but I appreciate the other comments from the other commissioners. I think they've well said, like the different viewpoints and kind of concerns and items we should be considering and make our decision.
Commissioner Carpenter, I know that you had kind of mentioned earlier, like fencing. I guess I will say I feel like correct me if I'm wrong. I think I heard the applicant say they'd be willing to entertain conditions of approval that might be different. And I know you mentioned specific things like fencing. I don't see sight lines necessarily changing given the unique kind of physical constraints of the site. But is there anything there that you care to talk more about?
One of it is the permeability of the site. There's 2-3 entrances. One of them, again, feels like just the flow of it is really constricted. Even the layout of the pods, I feel like you get a broadside of a pod on frontage instead of, picnic tables. That's one of those design considerations of how are we engaging the public realm and this private site? It seems like without redesigning the whole thing, there could have been a way to fix that.
Yeah.
So.
I agree. I do feel like there could have been different design choices. We heard some of their perspective on that, right? Trying to work within the constraints of the site and the sunken area and the elevated and those kinds of things. Could, had they known we were gonna frown our eyebrows at this, would they have made different design choices? Possibly. We don't have those different design choices in front of us today.
Can I ask the applicant, and this is more of an aside, maybe clarification of the chapel basement?
I'd look to the attorney on that since we are in a deliberative space as opposed to.
If it's a clarifying question about a design element, I think you can ask the applicant to clarify something on the design so that you understand it. if that's an item that you want to deliberate on, but beyond that, you're in deliberations.
Okay.
The record's closed.
If I may, is the basement a historically valuable piece of the old property? Or, again, I'm saying this delicately because I get the issue, or is it something that was difficult to demolish? And we saw a good vision. I think, again, it's a good vision to reuse it in a different way, but what is the historical value that you're trying to preserve?
Could you, Eric, join us on the mic, please? Thank you. Yeah, I know.
We looked at it a couple different ways. The basement one, it was a protected area. We have elements, we have that kind of thing. We didn't feel like it was deep enough that it really created like a hole where people were sitting in. Our intent is to not create this fence barrier. It's to create that open space, whatever. We have large gates rolling, that kind of stuff. We obviously need to secure it at night, that kind of thing. But the basement, I mean, we could potentially raise it up a little bit. We were trying to create with the grade that's closest to City Hall, that lower level that's in there. And one of the reasons we put the food carts sideways with it is that's where the food carts want to be. They want their brand sitting right there. And then the tables are lined up. We have designed it, we can move things around. You know, as people start to feel, like, I don't know, we'll move this over here, we'll move that over there. Because we have water things everywhere, but we could very easily raise that up a little bit, but the intent was to try and create that protected area, bring that big cover down a little bit, so it's not this huge thing, and try and create that open space. Does that make kind of sense if I'm trying to add that?
Anything, maybe just, I was going to say also, maybe just to clarify, I do feel like at some point in your presentation, you talked about kind of discovering the sunken chapel or something like that. I don't know if that was kind of the genesis of your question, but.
We did discover some things that we didn't know were there. But that space was, it's got the ramp down, and once again, trying to protect that area was just, is it historic? I don't believe that's historic in any way.
If it's okay with your city attorney, I'd like to address the chair.
I'll ask our city attorney.
Thank you. Here's what I'm going to propose, if you will allow us the indulgence. I would like 5 minutes to confer on, what we've heard is views into the site and entrances. Those are problems that we may be able to solve. Maybe not to the full extent of Commissioner Carpenter's design preferences, but we certainly want to get as far towards them as we can. And so given the fact that we've spent some good time here, what I would request that the Planning Commission do is allow us 5 or 8 minutes to confer, because we don't want to just throw, essentially throw a bunch of confetti at you. We want to think about what we're going to say, but allow us to reopen the record, to testify as to some conditions of approval that we could recommend, that may address some of Commissioner Carpenter's concerns, understanding it might not change his vote, but we want to at least give it the best shot we can.
Sure, thanks. Before we kind of go there, I think I'm very happy to have a 10-minute recess, just make sure everyone has enough time to have conversations. I was just kind of going back. I know I said that personally struggling with, again, I think I was the one who said the square peg round hole comment in our initial hearing on this. And again, recognize the standards aren't met. Not all, the guidelines, I think it gets maybe a little bit harder, but I do think that, the focus on that broader outcome, I think is a really important thing. And one place that I had in preparing for this, and in some ways will actually say, I think some of the testimony tonight changed my own position. I spent time looking at the city's comprehensive plan. And in Chapter 8, which is urban design and land use, we have goals and policies, and we have specific goals and policies related to downtown Milwaukee. If I might entertain myself, I'll just go through a few of these because I feel like they're helpful. Allow for a variety of dense urban uses and multi-story buildings that can accommodate a mix of commercial, retail, office, and higher density residential uses. Provide a high-quality pedestrian environment that supports safe, convenient access to the area's multiple transportation modes. Prioritize pedestrian access and movement in the downtown, also improving safety and access. Encourage development that takes advantage of the proximity to and views of the Willamette River and the Willamette Greenway. I think this proposal does that. Ensure that buildings are designed with storefront windows and doors, weather protection and details. I know we've talked about some of those things. And then maybe the operative clause that contribute to an active pedestrian-oriented streetscape. F, ensure that design standards and guidelines reflect a well-defined community vision for the downtown. G, encourage a diverse mix of commercial services and amenities that serve downtown residents and employees as well as visitors. I think this would clearly do that. H, support uses that contribute to the vibrancy of downtown area, including special events and outdoor uses such as farmers markets and festivals. And I think Commissioner Mulhorn spoke to some of that in his own thoughts. So again, while we might not, be close at times in terms of the downtown design standards and guidelines, I do think our broader policies, and I think this is where maybe Vera got it right the first time, say that, while the standard might not be met, the intent is definitely there. I think with that, why don't we take a 10-minute recess? I've got 8:11 on my clock, so we'll come back at 21 after. That might give you enough time to restart your computer. And with that, we'll take a recess and reconvene at 8:21. All right, we are back on air. I'll bring us back into order, I guess. And we have Commissioner Foynmayor and Commissioner Freeman. You just appeared. That was like with that background, Josh, and you just like poof, genie appearing. That's pretty amazing. Great. Well, we are back and on air. And Garrett, I think I just wanted to confirm, I believe before we went into recess, you had a request to reopen the public hearing and submit new testimony.
That's correct, Chair. The purpose of the testimony would be to offer to do what we can do to try and address some of Commissioner Carpenter's concerns.
Great. Well, at this point in the hearing, I'd like to reopen public testimony. And so we'll be accepting additional testimony right now.
Thank you, Chair. I am not, in case you were nervous or scared or wanted to run away and hide, I'm not going to go back over everything I said originally. I think we've made the best point we can about, how we view that the guidelines should be applied here. But I also, one of the things, again, during my initial talk that I mentioned is that I feel like, regardless of the outcome, I feel like this is a much better discourse than I saw happen in June. And so with that in mind, there are certain things, Commissioner Carpenter, that I believe we could do, not to fully change the design. That's not practical tonight. But, your concerns are well taken. We don't necessarily agree with all of your points, but also there are things we can do. So what I asked our group to do is, with the 10 minutes, take a look at the design and see what we could do to do two things. Number one, lessen the impact of the fences, which you mentioned. And then number two, to increase the area of essentially open access. So before I propose what I'm going to propose, I want to clarify the reason for the fence. The reason for the fence is simply that these carts are vulnerable. And in order for us to be able to attract and keep them there and have them be successful, we need to provide some level of security when the cart pod or the food park is closed. So a fence is absolutely necessary. We can't get away from it. But one of the things we could do, and I asked, the height right now, I believe is proposed to be 7 or 8 feet. And we would propose a condition of approval. And again, it's not a chain link fence, it's wrought iron, but I'm trying to find things that are reasonably objective here, like height and percentage of open area. So as far as the fence is concerned, we would propose a condition that we reduce the height of that fence to 6 feet, no higher than 6 feet. The idea there would be to lessen the impact of a tall fence on, the pedestrian environment. And I think too, if I can almost look over a fence, I'm usually not too intimidated by it, but I can understand if there's a fence very, very high up above me, it looks like it can make you feel like you're really not supposed to be in there. And so your point there is well taken. That's what we can do that's reasonably objective tonight. The other thing is our architecture team took a look at the amount of entrance and exit area, i.e., basically those areas that we would open up and would be completely open during the time that the food park is open. And Carl did some rough math, and we figured out that we've got about 10% of the perimeter that's capable of being fully opened during business hours. And what we would propose to do is to increase that to 25%. So in other words, 1 full quarter of the perimeter fence would be open in aggregate during the, during the operational time. So those are the two conditions that we can propose. They're, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, that's the best we can do tonight. And we wanted to give you something that Vera could actually enforce. And so we figured that, using some kind of numerical benchmark would be the way to go. Now, on the question of the basement, there's no getting around that. We can't flip-flop the site. We talked about that briefly. It's just not possible for a number of reasons, which I'm not going to go through. But one of the points that Terry asked me to make is that that basement level is going to come up after development 8 to 12 inches. So I don't think that that you're not going to be able to see people there. I think that you will be able to see folks there, particularly depending on where you are around the site. So those are two conditions, assuming that we were approved. If we're not, they don't matter. But if we were approved, we propose those two conditions to do what we can to address the commission's concerns.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Stevenson. Would any members of the Planning Commission have questions for the applicant? Yeah, please. Yeah.
So was there a number then to that finished elevation of the basement? Just, or was that not, we're not quite there yet?
It's got some different elevations in it. We
Yeah.
have to get it sloping, so it does come up, and we got new layers going over it, so it comes up almost a foot, just as the current plan sits.
Yeah.
Which brings it to just, this level without knowing the exact dimension.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, for me,
can't provide a specific
I don't want
number
to
at the
nail you
moment,
down to
but
a number.
I think that's a hard number to capture. It was a clarification point that Terry wanted me to make. But when I saw that, I thought about, what is that? I think it's in the Beatles Help, where one of them has a bed, like one of the Beatles has a bed that's like inset in the floor. And I'm like, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, I don't think that having folks below grade, at least in that section, because the site undulates, right? It's in different levels, which kind of adds to the interest of it. But I don't think it's going to be quite as stark as it may have appeared in the drawings.
Yeah, and I do think that, I think sometimes with other variances that we dealing with physical constraints of sites, I mean, in many ways, it's exactly what you guys are dealing with here on this proposal. So it broadly doesn't seem unreasonable. Any other questions, Commissioner Fuenmayor? No? Okay. Commissioner Carpenter, anything else? I had one, but slightly tangential, so I'll let you stay on topic.
It's just showing appreciation for bringing these up. I think those are reasonable and they make sense. I'll
Great.
let you talk.
Perfect. Regardless, I think, of the reopening the record here, a condition of approval that I had been entertaining separately, that's very minimal in my perspective, is I was noting in the MCC chapter 19700 public facilities improvements that the city is going to be requiring you to rebuild the curb. Fun fact, out there on the curb are 2 historic horse ties. I'd like to see those preserved and reinstalled. I imagine, I think you could probably just get rid of them if you wanted to. I would like to see that not happen, and so I'd like to see that included as a condition of approval, and looks like the team is amenable to that.
Yeah, Commissioner Sherman will propose that as a condition of approval.
Great. Wonderful. I figured you might do it anyways, but it's just a nice historic thing. I don't even know if there's any others left on Main Street. It'd be an interesting thing to inventory. Is there any other kind of questions for the applicants? No? Great. Well, I will close the record again. Thank you for the additional testimony. We can move back to deliberation. I guess, do we need to go through the process and see if anyone else wishes to testify who was on before?
Do we have anybody on air, Vera?
No. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so we can move back. The public testimony portion of the hearing on the request of a downtown design review and variance at 1915 through 1925 Southeast Scott Street, file DR 2024-001 and VR 2024-002 is now reclosed. Commissioners, can we continue the discussion?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. I don't know, Commissioner Carpenter, your thoughts on some of the things the applicant has kind of proposed. I will say that I personally think increasing the amount of entrance and exit area from 10% to 25% seems generally like a great move in the first place, and certainly improves kind of pedestrian access and probably activation a little bit further, but I would certainly welcome your thought as I share some perspective on that.
Yeah, I'd agree. And again, a lot of the conversation tonight and in the first hearing was that this would feel like a public space and plaza. And I wasn't getting that in the initial designs. I think it gets us closer with opening it up more, so I appreciate that. So that's my take on that.
And what are your thoughts or any other commissioners' thoughts on the reducing the height of the fence by 1 to 2 feet?
Since you're addressing me right away, I'll let others speak as well. But I think the reduction, again, helps with the pedestrian scale. Doesn't feel like a barrier as much as a permeable membrane at a pedestrian scale. So, with preserving security, of course.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is, in the city of Milwaukee, the police department is exceptionally responsive to phone calls. So any other kind of thoughts or discussion? Vice Chair Freeman, Commissioner Foyn-Mayor, I don't know if you have any new additional thoughts based on new testimony from the applicant.
Is there any specific design on that fence that you guys have, or is any? I just like there is like this idea that we just gonna have this fence, but there is like it seems like a regular. I don't know. I'm just puzzled by many things, so I have a hard time.
It's if I'm
accepting some of this.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, it's fine.
Yeah. I wish you'd asked the question during the reopened testimony, and then the applicants could kind of speak to it directly.
Yeah.
I guess, I think as we are deliberating, if staff could pull back up some of the images. I'm remembering, I do believe it's a wrought iron fence. And so maybe we can pull up a few of the images just to kind of look at the visual characteristic of it.
Splash.
Sorry, it's a wrought iron, this is part of it. Let me find another document to bring up. Hold on 1 second.
I was thinking that since that is going to be a prominent element in the design, even though it's intended to be transparent, it will still be there at night and at the off hours. So it will be a prominent design feature within the off hours of the site. So it will be interesting to see some kind of quality design around that fence that will be different and attractive. That's going to be right there in downtown.
So this first image kind of provides kind of mock-up, I guess, of what we're looking at.
It looks some kind of diagonal, but I don't know if this is just an effect with the rendering. This is like it's vertical and it's just the shade.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ernestine. I think it's part of the effect of the rendering. There was Vera might be looking for a different image, but there was a section of the fence on the left-hand side that I thought clearly looked vertical elements. Yeah.
I'll pull up the application materials themselves.
Thanks, Vera.
Rather than a
Appreciate
presentation,
on the
sorry.
fly.
One second. No, no, no,
You're doing
no
a great
worries.
job. Now we just need to wait for like PowerPoint to say it needs to update and hopefully no CrowdStrike outages reoccur.
Okay. Okay, this is from the drawing set that they submitted. So let me zoom in some more here. If I can get this. Yeah. So hopefully that's obvious. So it looks like it's a vertical black wrought iron fence, I believe. Okay. There it is.
Got there quickly as well.
I hope that helps.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate taking time to dig that up. Any other discussion, or are we ready for a motion? If I'm taking a straw poll, I think we have the votes. Maybe not. See, Commissioner Mulhorn and myself, I think, in favor of the original findings of approval with the added conditions of approval on the 6-foot fence, the increasing the entrance and exit area to 25%, and then the preservation and reinstallation of the historic horse ties. Where do my other three commissioners stand?
I did not approve the design as is right now. And I am not in agreement with I don't think it meets the design guidelines and of the standards.
Were there,
I think I'm ready for a vote, Chair.
you're ready for a vote?
Yeah.
Do you care to share which way you might be voting, Vice Chair Freeman?
Actually, I don't, Chair.
Okay, thanks. I just felt like I'd ask. Commissioner Carpenter, I know that you had kind of previously shared some of your concerns on fencing and sightlines. Commissioner Foynmayor, I don't know if there's any specific issues that you cared to talk more about, or if it was just kind of broad enough, from your perspective, kind of non-compliance, that's kind of the overall issue. So maybe I'll look to either to you or Commissioner Carpenter to share a little bit more on your current thinking.
I did some quick math. There was 40 out of 57 design guidelines that did not meet the design standard. Sorry, not design standard, but design guideline. It's 30% that either didn't apply or actually met. And I think that's kind of stark. Again, understanding and appreciating the added conditions. I think that goes a long way. But looking at comprehensive plan, looking at economic development, looking at a whole host of things that we talked about tonight. I need a second.
Sure.
I think.
Yeah,
But
we can have some
would
time.
love to.
We've
again,
been here for a while. We
would
can
like to
stay
hear
for a little bit longer.
Vice
Yeah.
chairs, maybe a little more input.
We do have a work session.
we
I
do.
know, that's true. Yeah.
So,
Brett is
Can I-
waiting patiently back there. Oh, but look, he's flexible. He just shrugged his shoulders.
Can I make maybe a
please.
quick comment that I think hasn't come up in the discussion as we get into the details of the design? I do, and I don't know how much this weighs into the specific issues that folks are grappling with, but from my count, roughly 75% of the public comments we received were in support of this project, and it wasn't like 3 out of 4, it was like 15 out of 20, and that's not 75%, but actually it is. I'm not going to sit here and do the math. Strike that from the record. But I do want to maybe just frame that because it's been a little bit lost in our deliberation, which is that I think there is pretty good support from the community for this. Obviously not unanimous, but just don't want that to get lost in the discussion of the details here.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. And I was also, I think, trying to determine, sometimes website cleanup doesn't always happen the best, but, we've got our downtown design guidelines 2-pager from the past, and I think, again, just reminding ourselves, as it states here, the guidelines support and complement the downtown and riverfront framework. They're used in conjunction with these ordinances and their guidelines. Their mission is a tool for designers to understand the city's design aspirations for downtown development. They don't prescribe specific design solutions, nor are they rigid requirements without flexibility. Should be viewed as an opportunity for applicants to propose new, innovative, and historically sensitive designs. And, I know that when a few of us, not even all of this body, because some of this body is a little bit newer, when we were going through the process to update the design guidelines and standards and get rid of the Design Landmark Commission, nobody talked about food cart pods. Like, wasn't even like a twinkle in anybody's eye, even though, embarrassingly, there's food cart pods everywhere. I like to think that, and, Commissioner Edge isn't here tonight, but I like to think that had we had a discussion about it, we probably would have figured out some of these things. And I think, as we heard from the mayor of West Lynn, their planning commission as well grappled with some of the exact same things that we're kind of grappling with. And I think as I kind of return back in terms of kind of, in many ways, like the North Star on this. And I know that when I started on this hearing back in June 11th, I was like, doesn't meet. And I think the more time I've kind of spent with this, returning back to things like the comprehensive plan and thinking about active pedestrian spaces and thinking about, more activity in downtown Milwaukie. I think this kind of checks some of those boxes. So that's, I think aside from some of the additional public support that is out there, recognizing that there is some flexibility in this process. And yeah, maybe it doesn't, maybe there's a lot of places it doesn't check the boxes, but I think broadly kind of the outcome is headed in the direction that I think as a community we want. Because reality is too, we might not get a 5-story building there for 5 years, given interest rates or anything like that, right? It's been a while since we've had a development proposal come through of kind of this scope and scale. And, the broader economic environment is not favorable towards commercial office space, which is what a 5-story building would be. Or, could be apartments as well, potentially. But again, that's not the application that we have in front of us. And I think in many ways, the one that we do have checks a lot of the boxes. It doesn't check every box, but it checks a lot of the boxes. So I would encourage my fellow planning commissioners to think about the broader outcome and the broader intent of what our code and our policies are pointing us towards as opposed to a specific frontage requirement or other things like that. Yeah, Vera.
If I could, through the chair, apologies. I just wanted, if I could, I was hoping to kind of come back for a minute. One of Commissioner Carpenter's comments were about the only 30% of the guidelines being met. And I just wanted to clarify that because the findings that we submitted for approval show them all being met. So I just wanted to clarify that point. And you may not agree with how we wrote the findings, but I just wanted to put the findings that we did showed them being met. I just wanted to clarify that 30% number. So, thank you.
I gave you a soliloquy or a monologue where you could do some thinking. I don't know if you've done some of that thinking, Commissioner Carpenter, during that time.
I have, yes.
Okay. Sounds like we are ready to entertain a motion. Can I get a motion to approve file DR-2024-001 as initially proposed, with the conditions of approval for the 6-foot fence, the 25% entrance and exit area, and the historic preservation and reinstallation of the horse ties? Can I get that motion?
I would motion to approve DR-2024-001 based on the findings previously presented and subject to the conditions outlined in the record tonight.
I think also, just to clarify, I think we also need to approve VR-2024-002 as well.
I would also motion to approve VR-2024/002 as well.
Great. So it's been moved. Is it seconded?
I'll second the motion, Chair.
It's been seconded. Thank you, Vice Chair. Is there any further discussion on the item? No further discussion. I'd like to ask staff to call the roll. So we're slightly changing our voting procedures, just updating them, I guess. So staff will just take a roll call, and planning commissioners one at a time will vote aye or nay. Laura, can you call the roll?
Aye.
Wayne Mayor,
Nay.
Commissioner Carpenter,
Nay.
Commissioner Freeman,
Aye.
Commissioner Chair Sherman.
I vote aye as well. The ayes have it. Application DR-2024-001 and VR-2024-002 is approved. If anyone wishes to appeal the Planning Commission's decision of the City Council, you must make your application stating the grounds for your appeal within 15 days of mailing the notice of decision. Please see planning staff for details. We want to really thank planning commissioners for a robust discussion and dialogue tonight. I know we don't always end split on decisions like this. Really appreciate everyone kind of showing up, sharing your perspective. I appreciate your questions, and also want to thank the applicant and the applicant's team for spending time with us tonight. Appreciated the conversation and some of the additional movement in the application. in some ways, the process isn't always the cleanest, but I think we got to a really good spot tonight, and I'm happy with this. And again, want to thank everyone, including my colleagues and staff, for the time and energy spent on this application. We'll move on to our work session item of the night. This work session is to receive a third update and discuss the project to update the Natural Resources Code. Senior Planner, Brett Kelver, who is also so polite to sit with us for such an extended period of time, will present information for discussion.
We're really going to get in the muck now, literally. We're talking about wetlands. Talk about wetlands.
All right, thank you, Chair Sherman. Councilors, if you give me just a moment to get the presentation up and share it, I will do that.
Has your computer restarted tonight already?
Mine has not, so I fully expect that to happen in the middle of everything. But the one that's running the show here should be okay, hopefully.
Hopefully.
I am trying to get the cursor to, now that I'm sharing, I
Do anything?
I crudely joked about updating PowerPoint earlier, and now here all of a sudden doesn't seem to.
well, it's over here, and then when I get to this thing, it disappears, so I can't start it in slideshow mode.
On a second screen somewhere.
Yeah, so I have to look.
Looks like it's, down. Do you see it, Brett? Yeah.
Yes. Oh my. No, see, it
It
disappeared.
like disappeared when you go on the PowerPoint. What if you go down further?
Hang on.
All right. We need our friendly city attorney who, is not an IT tech, but we could maybe ask Justin.
Oh,
You can figure it out, Brett.
You end sharing, you did, and then try to reshare, like select screen or something, or select window.
oh. Let me try sharing again here and see if anything's different.
Well, if we don't have the PowerPoint, we can always go old school.
I
We all
think,
have the staff report. So it's really just going through the staff report.
okay,
Oh, and just as soon as I said that, see, just like magic,
Look at
that's how it
that.
works.
I think it was a form of operator error.
Fantastic.
All right. Well, thank you all for your continued attention. We'll try to move quickly through this. This is the third installment of the series of work sessions we've been having with you over the last few months in preparation for some amendments to our Natural Resources Code that we're expecting to bring to you soon. So this third piece is about our maps and the mapping of the natural resources. And just a sample shot here, I would just want to explain the couple of features that we have. So our natural resource map shows the location of three essential features. Let me see if I can I get my cursor over there to point around? Okay, a little bit, not very well. A little bit, okay. So there's these kind of bluish hatched features represent wetlands. that may or may not have been formally delineated. And you'll see the green hatching that's around them represents a 50-foot, what's called a vegetated corridor. Altogether, those features constitute what are referred to as WQRs, or water quality resources. They represent protections that have been in our code since I think the early 2000s that do relate to water quality and the understanding that it was important to protect these features, again, mostly wetlands and streams. And then the orange hatching that you can see is the more relatively recent introduction, the habitat conservation areas, or HCAs, that were introduced into the code in 2011, 2012. And you'll see that they are generally close to kind of pegged on the protected water features. So these are the two features that we show on our map. And as was noted in the staff report, the map is intended to, it shows the general location of the WQRs. So in some cases, like I said, we have had a wetland feature that's been delineated. We know generally where Kellogg Creek and Johnson Creek are, but the idea with the map is it shows us, staff, the public, property owners, that we are aware that there's a water feature there that has some protections, but when you really get into a project, there's an onus on the property owner to more clearly identify, by measuring on the ground, kind of where is the 50-foot protection area. With the habitat conservation areas, and when they were introduced, the map was acknowledged to serve as the actual indicator. So using aerial photographs and the mapping data that we had, when we're seeing it on the map, that's what we understand the HCA to be. So I'll get a little bit more into how those things are handled, but that's how the map deals with those two resources. There is a procedure in the map, in the code, that related to the habitat conservation areas and how to verify where they were located, and an acknowledgement that there may be some minor incongruities, some places where, because of the gross nature of the data that we receive from Metro for the HCAs, that in some cases part of a building was included as HCA, part of a parking area was included, and so there's a fairly simple procedure for cleaning up those kinds of things. And if you look on I'm going to stop trying to gesture with the cursor because I feel like it's really tiny and doesn't help. So I'll just try to use some directions. So on the left-hand side of this image, on the west side of this property, you can see, if you can tell, kind of there are two houses at the street and then kind of a really narrow flagpole that opens into this larger property. And if you can just tell, like in this case, the entire property is actually shown on our map as a wetland, which we can talk about a little bit more later. So there are this is one of those inaccuracies, but you can see where the orange has been kind of more precisely pared back to represent what we understood on the ground on this site to be, for the HCA piece of it, where there was actually development, parking structures. So we cleaned up the map for the HCA piece in this. The issue, as you can tell, since the water feature, the wetland, is more improperly mapped, it does cause some issues with the HCA in general. It raises the question of, well, we've clearly cleaned up the parking areas in the buildings, but where is the wetland on this site? And would that affect where we see the actual HCA on this property? And so the current procedure that we have in the code is very convoluted. It was based on kind of retracing the methodology that Metro used for establishing the HCAs, which involved considerations of classes of riparian habitat, of urban development value, and references to maps that were, I think from the outset, fairly gross in terms of hard to zoom in on and get any kind of clarity or accuracy, and also maps that aren't really being maintained anymore by Metro. I think maybe the expectation was at some point local jurisdictions would pick up their own mapping efforts, and for obvious reasons, mostly capacity. That's been a challenge for a lot of jurisdictions. So this prompted a look back. There have been a few times when applicants have come to us and said, okay, I'll go through I'm not sure your map is accurate. I think I want to go through the process and try to clean this up. And we've pointed them to the code, and we've all kind of gotten to scratch our heads a little bit about, I'm not sure what to tell you about where to find the Metro Vegetative Cover map. It's not super accurate or available, that kind of thing. And so what we wanted to do is try to take the opportunity to clear up and clarify the methodology that's used for detailed verifications of HCAs. And recognizing that it seems like, as we look at this, the key elements are you or are you not a riparian area? And if so, what is your vegetative status? Like, what kind of vegetation is there? Is it mostly open soil or grasses? Is it shrubby, or is it more forested? And at the end of the day, when we tried, and this is a draft of what's been proposed to simplify or clarify the detailed verification procedure, it appears that distance from a protected water feature is a key, and also what the vegetative nature is. And so our proposal, we're still kind of vetting through this, is to, again, simplify this procedure so that it's a lot easier. A property owner may still need to engage someone who's got a little bit of expertise in this, but at least the process should be a lot clearer and accessible for everyone. And especially, I think, by us getting clearer about the definitions, or these descriptions of low vegetation, of woody vegetation, of forest canopy are in the code, but I think we might be able to kind of highlight them and make it a little bit clearer that this is how we're handling this. So with that in mind, I think our proposal in this point is to simplify and remove a lot of the existing language and the tables that aren't really useful in this part of the code, and to replace it with something more akin to that table and a little bit more pared down description that gets at what we're understanding are the key elements in identifying these. Yeah, question, Commissioner Carl.
Quick, the slope question, is that over the entire 99 feet, or is it at any point if there's a slope over 25% within? So I'm looking at 101 feet to 200 feet, that row. If HCA, if slope is greater than 25%, is that over that entire stretch, or is it if there's any point in that range, if there's a 25% slope change?
Good question. I don't have an exact answer for you, but I think there may be a spot in the code or some methodology somewhere that explains how to calculate slope.
I guess I asked that only to make sure that there is something like that in there. So cool.
Yeah,
thanks.
Yeah, right. Because I guess the question would be, right, what if the last 5 feet are at 25%? How do I handle that? So I think that's a thing we'll keep in mind as we kind of clean this up.
Thanks.
All right, another issue that we wanted to get at was just recognizing that we have some stormwater facilities across the city, and in some cases, some are identified as protected water features and others are not. So the example on the left is one that actually came up within the last couple of years. You can see the vegetated corridor area extending across the top end of this one property, the care facility. This is on Stanley Avenue, bending kind of in an elbow and running down behind these residential properties to a piece of land that was actually subdivided within the last 4 or 5 years, and there is a wetland that was delineated as part of that. The recognition from the property owner of the site just to the north of this developed residential care facility was, at the time, the vegetated corridor was being shown as 50 feet wide because the stream feature there was identified as a primary protected water feature. And the recognition was that this was essentially a point where several storm pipes, part of the city's stormwater infrastructure, were coming together and actually being daylit, kind of coming out of a pipe and just running in an open ditch in this area. that over time obviously had developed some riparian features and presented as some kind of stream feature. The question was, did it really rise to the level of needing a 50-foot protection area, or could it be classified as a secondary feature, which has a 15-foot area? And the methodology established in the code for looking at water quality resources was assessed by the natural resource expert who was working for the applicant, and the conclusion was that it was indeed just a secondary protected feature, but it still raised the question of, well, is this really right? This is city stormwater that just happens to be spilling out onto a property. Should this really be considered a stream? And I think that's an issue that bears some revisiting. The understanding that I'm getting as I'm talking with our on-call natural resource consultant is that these things can be handled a little differently as stream features versus wetlands. And I'll get into the wetland piece in just a second. But I think the idea is that there are some physical things you can look at with these situations to determine whether the feature should be protected or not. And even though a lot of the stormwater that's feeding this area is coming through pipes, there are some fair questions about what is the size of the area that is feeding into those pipes, understanding that before development, stormwater went somewhere. And so in some cases, it's not like the city is generating stormwater and putting it there. It's being collected from rooftops, from streets and whatnot. And there is some recognition that as much as the code clarifies that stormwater in a pipe is not a protected water feature and does not come under the rules of the water quality resources, the fact that it does make that distinction, I think, lends some legitimacy to the concern or observation that when these features are daylit, especially if there's some water in that area year round, so that you could make the case that it's not just being fed by stormwater, especially then if it's picking up some kind of stream feature or something, or spring, then there is some validity to protecting it that way. And especially in this case, because the feature is not only daylit, but it is in fact feeding what has been officially delineated and recognized by the Division of State Lands as a wetland. I think we ended up in a place on this where we felt comfortable that it seemed fair to reduce the protected area from 50 down to 15 feet, but to continue to look at it that way. But I think we want to take this opportunity to just make sure we're clear and sound on that methodology and see if there's any way to make it any more explicit in the code so that staff and the public as well can understand what or why some of these features are shown as they are. The example on the right is an example of what is identified only right now as a storm feature. It is identified on our map as like a little natural area, but it does not have a wetland designation. I'm not sure that it's been delineated. I don't know the history in particular of this feature. You can see that little orange, the orange lines in general on these maps, as much as you can see them, represent some of our storm pipes. And in that case, down at the lower right-hand corner of the image on the right, there is a storm pipe that is emptying into that feature. The understanding that I'm developing in the conversations with our consultant is that it is important to consider both the history of what was on the site, was there a wetland in this area before development, and part of the compromise or the working with the development was to kind of move the wetland or kind of replace the wetland or add on to the wetland with some storm feature, or like some of the projects, the one that has happened recently, the city did at the intersection of Oak, Monroe, Railroad, and what's happening at the western ends of Kelvin and Balfour in the Ardmore area, where the city has constructed a wetland and is deliberately bringing stormwater there. Again, even though it is a daylit feature, it is going to have some water from these pipes at some points in the year, and over time it will probably develop wetland type characteristics. The indication that we're getting is that it really isn't appropriate to be classifying those explicitly constructed or engineered storm facilities as wetlands. However, there are some interesting different examples. Also in the Ardmore neighborhood, farther to the north, there are a couple of not ponds, but
detention ponds.
Yeah, detention ponds that, again, there are a lot of storm pipe connections to these features. For example, also the Minthorn Springs area, the wetlands kind of just to the east of the Milwaukie Marketplace. My understanding is that a lot of that area before the marketplace was developed was wetland, and the wetland that remains in the Minthorn area was, I guess, part of the compromise or part of what is left from that development. So we also have a lot of storm pipes in there that help prevent flooding in that area that kind of provide for some overflow release of water. But it is, I think most people would argue and feel like it does look and feel like a natural wetland, even though it has obviously had some manipulation in the past. So there is a mix of features that some are wholly constructed, some are modified or kind of attached to or represent some kind of historical shadow of a wetland. And I think what we wanted to do in this case, or with this issue, was just to take a little bit of a harder look at a few sites like this in particular to see if we could understand a little bit more about whether they were accurately characterized on the map as a storm feature, or should they be a wetland. So just, that's going to be one of the points I think we're trying to continue to take a look at. And then along those lines, a couple more examples of some features that, the one on the left that has a storm connection, you can see the orange lines, the pipes that are running into this feature. This is on Willow Street, just to the west of Ball Michelle Park. It's a city-owned property. You can see, if you can see a little bit again, that bluish modeling is basically the same shape as the lot shape, which if you can also see the 50-foot green vegetated buffer around it. And what prompted a little bit more of a look at this was the property just to the south of this site was doing a very small addition that was in the water quality resource area. And this felt a little awkward because it was going to require a type 3 planning commission review for this addition when we had a pretty good sense that the shape, that light blue with the hatches through it, shape that looks more like a pond, represents more or less the actual shape of the detention pond that the city has planted trees around and kind of maintains to some degree. So we felt like it wasn't accurate to show the entire tax lot as a wetland. While we didn't formally delineate this, we did work with our on-call consultant to take a look at it and give us enough of an assurance that the shape of the wetland feature was actually more like the shape of the detention pond. And so it made us feel comfortable about kind of basically pulling the 50-foot buffer much farther back, in this case, much closer to the southern edge of that pond. The site that we were looking at before, this is to the image to the right, is just off Fernberg Street. And you can see in this view, you can see there is a little bit more of an actual pondish type wetland feature that's a little more specifically identified, but for whatever reason, the entire tax lot is showing up on our layer as the wetland area. This hasn't really been an issue for any of the neighbors till now because no one's really proposed any development, but it's an obvious place where it would feel kind of immediately uncomfortable to have someone trying to do some kind of an addition or other project on the site and we'd have to scramble a little bit, I think, to kind of pull that back. So I think we wanted to take the opportunity with this project to just, again, look at some of these sites and see where there are some areas that we could clean things up, even if we're not going through a formal delineation process, that we're kind of more informally trying to better identify the boundaries. There are obviously it's one thing when we're looking at a couple of the city properties that have these features because we're in charge of that resource. So, if we decide we want to formally delineate it, that's, that's our prerogative. It's a little different issue when we're talking about a private property. But in this case, you can see it would be to a lot of neighbors' benefits if this feature was a little more accurately identified on our map. So in conjunction with what we're doing with the map stuff in general, we wanted to just take a look at a few of these areas and see if we could take the opportunity to clean that up. And then I guess what I'd say too about, in general, the map, again, as I explained before, I think for a long time, before the HCA was introduced, we showed the water quality resource boundaries on our zoning map. They kind of were what they were. Again, the layer that we were using was intended to identify the general location of these things. And when you actually got into a project, the code was pretty clear about what you needed to do next to identify the resource. So we weren't really doing corrections to that layer and thus to the zoning map because we pretty well knew where most of the wetlands and the streams were. That situation changed when the HCA's were added. And like I explained before, that map became, or that layer became, what was the actual resource. And so it raised the question of, when I clean up the HCA by carving around a parking lot or a structure, do I have to go and through a whole zone map change? And we decided when we were adopting the HCA provisions into the code that we did not want to do that. And so we tried to very clearly create a separation between what we called an administrative map for the natural resources and the zoning map. It says very explicitly in the code, it is not on the zoning map. We're not doing zone map changes every time someone does some kind of verification. And that has worked, well enough so far. At some point, we stopped maintaining a separate physical map called in our administrative map. But as I'm noting here with some of these goals, we have felt it's important when people are looking at the zoning and other overlays for the property, it's helpful to show the natural resources on the site and let you know if you're going to need to do some other review. So we wanted to show it on our zoning map, and that's how you currently access it when you're looking at our Milwaukie maps and what we call, I guess, the zoning map these days. You can turn on that layer and see those resources. And so we want to keep that relationship, but we wanted to just make sure that we were okay, that it continues to be legally defensible and our process is clear and correct, so that we can kind of maintain the separation between those resource layers and the zoning map. And I think the distinction that we wanted to draw, especially if we do, as we're maybe more clearly identifying some of the wetland features, or if we get into a little bit more detailed HCA verification, it's possible that right now, like what we've mostly done is people have been cleaning up or shrinking the HCA areas because of the errors. But as we clarify our detailed verification, it's possible that we might be able to start identifying some new resources, some things that would appear on the map. And in those cases, you really are introducing a new regulation that someone didn't have to deal with that could affect their property and what they could do with it. So in those cases where we're adding things to the map, it does feel like we want to be clear that those should go through more of a zone map change process, and people should have an opportunity for public comment and participation in that process. So all that to say that I think what we want to do is just make sure that our process is clear in the code, both for staff and for people who have natural resources on their property, so we can understand and be very clear about how we're handling it. So with that in mind, I think we're just going to confirm with Justin that we're using the right process. We're looking at a few other jurisdictions to see how other communities are handling this, and we just want to make sure we're on solid footing proceeding. Wrapping up, I just wanted to follow up on a couple things from our past discussions. The first work session we had focused on the tree code. The second one focused more on kind of our effort to create some clear and objective standards for water quality resource disturbance with respect to housing. I just want to confirm for you that one of the things we are planning to still do and coordinate with the urban forestry program is, I think, they're moving forward with the effort to clean up and update the tree code. I think that's happening later this year and into the early part of next year. And we thought it was a good opportunity to try to make sure these two sections of code fit together. And I think the deal that we've worked out is that in natural resource areas, more or less, the natural resource code will handle tree removal. And I think we're pulling, making sure that our exempt list and the things that you could do with type 1 review for tree removal are more in line with how the tree code would handle it anyway, so that we're trying to eliminate duplication of need for permits and review while not giving up things, for example, the urban forestry program is trying to do, and obviously manage the natural resources. Public trees, that is trees that are on city-owned properties that are in natural resource areas. Right now, I think our understanding is that the tree code will still handle those. And then we're still trying to sort out how we're going to handle the natural resource management plan. Examples of things that would be coming up with that would be the dam removal at Kellogg Creek. I think the Watershed Council is pretty involved and invested in doing a big restoration effort there, and it'd be nice if we could help that be streamlined and not have multiple city processes. On the issues with the last work session that we did and the water quality resource effort to come up with some clear and objective standards, we've had some clarity about that. It sounds like it is legitimate to say that a clear and objective path forward for disturbance of water quality resource areas is don't disturb them, unless your site is so constrained that it's reasonable to say, you got to let me do something with that. And so with that in mind, I think we're trying to come up with something that's a little bit similar to a little bit of that process is in the HCA part of the code right now for residential properties, where you do a little bit of math. You see how much of your property is HCA, how much is not. Depending on the number, you can or can't disturb some amount. And I think we're heading towards trying to identify something like that. So the sites that are very constrained by water quality resource, that overlay can have a reasonable opportunity to do at least some development for housing on that. So that's something that we should be able to present to you as part of that code package. And then the last thing is just, we have just in the last few weeks finally started getting information from FEMA related to the effort to make updates to the national flood insurance policy that are flood management rules related to the Endangered Species Act. And there's a whole thing that's been going on for several years. And we've been kind of wondering and waiting, when would that happen? Because it's largely going to affect Title 18 or flood hazard protections, but obviously flood areas have a lot of overlap with riparian areas. And so I think feels to me right now like the timing is pretty good for us to start trying to understand what's going to be required as part of that process, so that we can, if needed, try to integrate some changes into the Natural Resource Code for that. So more will be coming on that front, I think, soon. But with that, I think just lining out where I think we're going to continue our coordination with Urban Forestry as they're moving forward with their project. I'm going to continue to consult with our consultant, city attorney, other agencies to just kind of keep developing the code, so that we're working on a draft of it. We're planning to go to the city council. I think we've landed on November 19th to give them an update, with the anticipation of coming back to you early in the year. Right now, kind of aiming for January, but coming to get going with the actual adoption process. So I know that it's been April was our first session, and here we are in September, and we might be coming back to you still in a few months from now. So we'll try to package things in a way that make it so that you can jump back into this, and we'll kind of try to lead you through the package of things. So with that, understanding you've had a long night already, and that there's plenty of weeds here, native or otherwise, that I want to ask if you have any questions about the mapping piece, and or thoughts about the other two work sessions we've had, those topics, anything related to the natural resources in terms of things that you've thought of, you're curious about whether or how we're going to cover them, and kind of where we're going from here. So with that.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Happy to open it up for questions on the mapping. I had a particular question. I guess your first slide was the one that actually brought it to mind. I don't know if you want to cue your slide back up. I guess I was just, when I saw that, I was just kind of asking myself the question of how features are identified or not, and what the process is there. And I was thinking of at Linwood Elementary School, there is a rectangular fenced feature that is kind of marshy a lot of the time. And I didn't see it on and maybe PowerPoint is failing us again, but which is totally okay. We could take it offline. But I was just kind of curious, your map, it didn't have anything. And I was sitting there instantly being I know there's something kind of there, and why is it not on the map? So I don't know if that's something you're prepared to respond to. We can also just follow up via email if that's easier.
Yeah, I think if you have some ideas or questions about particular features you may be aware of in the community, you wonder, is this, why is this not a protected feature? Send those to me.
And I don't know if I don't even know what it is, but it is marshy. It is in the whole area of some of the slides you were showing with the culvert ditch down to the delineated wetland. And I was just kind of asking myself, well, why is this thing not?
And I'm sorry, I was attempting to figure out PowerPoint. Can you just tell me again, where was this again?
Linwood Elementary School on North Clackamas property. They have the playground, if you know where the playground is. just to the west of the playground, still on their property, is this oddly shaped rectangle. It's fenced off. It's very thick vegetation in there. And I believe there's water there a lot of the year.
Okay.
And I think if you kind of exit out of the school district's property, there's the Ukrainian church. There's kind of a big ditch that goes west, and that big ditch goes into the culvert area you were talking about. So anyways, I just kind of, again, saw it on the map and I was like, well, why? I think there's water there most of the year. Why is that not on the map? And and I don't know, but maybe we can figure it out.
We can follow.
Yeah. Ernestina?
Yes, I had a question is when you were here, we're talking about the historic map and the historically, how do you know what features were there or not? And I was wondering what historic maps do you use? Because I have used in the past the Sanborn map. I don't know if you probably know that, but the Sanborn map has a lot of these features, and I had seen it. I use it in other research projects when I do historic research on districts. That it usually shows you some of those features, and you kind of see where the properties ended, and they kind of repeat, and all those that kind of delineated. That is not, of course, it's not GPS map. But it has some of those features, and I was wondering if you guys had used any of those resources, as well as the older maps.
I think the short answer would be no, but I will look into that. I think in terms of what shows up on our maps, I'm not totally sure where all that came from. I think, again, Metro provided a lot of information. I mean, obviously, some of it was pretty clear because of our stream corridors. But I have the impression that we got some other information about where some of our wetlands are from Metro. We haven't done an official local wetlands inventory, and in part, I think that hasn't seemed to be needed because I think the feeling is that the information that we have on our map is fairly accurate and representative. But yeah, I think it would be helpful, especially as we're trying to double check or see if we're missing anything, to take a look at some of those kinds of resources like you were mentioning. So I'll definitely take that suggestion.
Yeah, I would just say mainly, like you were mentioning about the area here in the Milwaukie marketplace, and that if you look at the older Sanborn maps, it shows you the where it was actually the lake where they will have the wood floating in there during when that was the wood the lumber company that was there. So historically, it has been a floated area that was used, and it was used like that because it was historically wet, and to float the wood and then take it to other places. But anyways, that made me think about that. It's a good resource. And I, as well as I think it's the Metzger map. They also have some other historic. Those are more site rather than buildings, because the Sanborn map was based on buildings itself. Was an insurance map. So anyway, I thought. But thank you. This is great presentation and great information. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you for those suggestions. I appreciate that.
Brett, what you're proposing, will this make staff's job easier?
Well, I think the idea is to make it clearer for us. It helps our communication with the public and with property owners. I think it's always good, as long as we do it right and it works, to have things clearly lined out and have our mapping accurate, and just to have everything kind of shaped up, I think would be useful. Yeah.
Yeah, great. And to give a little more power to administrative review, I think is huge as well, for you guys to be like, oh, I don't think that really is a wetland. We can work with you on changing that without having to go through type 3. I think that's great and huge. Type 5, yeah. Yeah. Another suggestion is if we, out of curiosity, are we also working with engineering when we're looking at these changes, just to see if there are other hard equipment updates, standards, design standards to storm outfalls or drains, catch basins that can help improve the existing wetlands that we know pipes connect to and drain to. Just a thought while we're going through this process. I know that's not really mapping related, but could be now might be a time where we can also identify instances where we can improve wetland areas by connecting or, collaborating, getting out of our silo and, working with the engineering department to look at updated standards for catch basins that we know directly pour into wetlands, like biopods or swales and stuff like that.
So you're talking about a little bit like current techniques or technologies for stormwater management that our engineering department might be overseeing or reviewing, for example, with a development proposal and trying to make more of a connection to where or how those things might improve or help.
Yeah, and again, it may not be related to what we're talking about today, but since we're opening up mapping, maybe a helpful, just making sure we're, looking over the cubicle, so to speak, to make sure we're all talking in the same direction. So
Okay,
just
yeah, thank
suggestion.
you. Thanks for that.
Any other thoughts or questions for staff? No? Great. Well, thanks so much, Brett. Thanks for sticking with us tonight. And yeah, look forward to kind of as we continue to move forward in the process. I will say I hope Planning Commission will be the place for natural resource management stuff for Kellogg Creek Dam removal. Feel like it makes or maybe not even Planning Commission. I feel like it makes more sense to think about revegetation from a planning perspective than a tree code perspective. But I'm not sure if the Planning Commission is the one who's going to make that decision for you all. But maybe just something to discuss more with City Council as you were talking about, kind of trying to figure out, is forestry kind of in the lead on that or is planning? But I feel like figuring out, like you said, a streamlined way for the city to interact with the Watershed Council on that project is exactly what we should do. So, yeah. Well, great. If there's nothing else, thanks again for part 3 of this. We'll stay tuned and for more, maybe get a refresh, and then maybe we'll close this out by April 2026 at the 1-year birthday of, or not. We'll see.
2025.
2025. Sorry, gosh, I'm already like.
Let's not go
Sorry, I was talking about some projects at work today,
Okay.
like that far ahead. So I got our years mixed up. We'll close this out in April 2025 at its 1-year birthday, not its 2-year birthday. Great. Well, we can move on to Planning Department business updates.
I don't think
Anything?
we've got anything. We've talked a little bit about, just some of the upcoming meetings. So, yeah.
Great. And yeah, maybe speaking of for our forecast for future meetings, I think you were saying is our October 22nd tentative NDA meeting, December 17th, tentative Planning Commission City Council meeting. We have anything between now and October 22nd?
Yeah, so we are not going to have anything on September 24th. So the next one is canceled. But then we do have a hearing item on October 8th. I think you'll remember the hearing for the extension on the garage on 35th. The applicant is now coming in requesting a vacation rental and turning that into a vacation rental. So we'll be having that hearing. We also have a couple of historic resource applications coming in. And so I think we've got those on the schedule. Oh, I'm great. I'm glad that we're talking about this. November 26th. It's the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Okay? So I think we may have not one, but two on the 26th. But I can only have that if I've got a quorum. So if anyone knows that they're not going to be available on the 26th, please just let me know so I can make sure that we have a quorum for that night.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you wouldn't mind maybe just putting an email out, since
Yeah, I can
especially
do that.
we're missing two commissioners tonight. And then if folks have any travel plans or aren't going to be able to make it, if you
Yeah.
could let Laura know.
I will do that.
All right, well, if there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
It's been moved,
Second.
it's been seconded. Thanks everyone for the depth of discussion and attention tonight. I know it was a long hearing, but again, really appreciate everyone taking the time to prepare for this and showing up to the conversation. We'll adjourn, I guess we'll say we need to take a vote. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 We need to have you call roll for that.
I don't think so.
Okay, great. We're adjourned. Have a good night.